need you at this point. Help us sort some things out. So,
Thanks.
but
Plus, every real writer I know is a pretender anyway.
Fair enough.
You have to do a lot of narrative work in what you do. So
Well, that's I may make that point in my remarks is exactly that. To be honest with you, that I often say to my team, yes, we're lawyers and we cite cases and all that, but we're really at the end of the day, we're telling stories, right? To judges. Judges are people. They're wired the same way as we all are. We're just wired for stories, I think, and so that's something we talk about a lot. And certainly the way I think about how I talk about the cases to the public, it's I try to make it less legalese and more literally telling a story. Yeah.
Bob, are you in Olympia?
I'm actually in the basement in my kids' playroom in North Seattle.
Okay.
So,
I know you've been working, as others have, this way a lot. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, so our home's in Seattle. So I work out of Olympia fairly frequently, but we also have a Seattle office. That's my primary office is Seattle. But I've only been in the office maybe 3 times since March. I mean, like just really not at all. So my kids' playroom, it's not unusual for my son to be playing with his Legos behind me on the floor just out of sight. He's upstairs right now having dinner, but it's not unusual for him to be just literally right behind my chair. It's kind of fun when he's there.
oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Cherene, thanks again for coming to class this week.
Oh yeah, no problem. It was nice. That got me out of the house for a little bit. Usually
Well, I hadn't realized you were making a special trip to your computer.
Well, there were 3 different other Zooms going on in my house, and I just thought that was gonna crash this. That was it. So
Understood.
Well, Simmons definitely wins the best library prize tonight. Elizabeth comes in second, but that's pretty good, Simmons.
And unlike Elizabeth's, mine are all real.
Does anybody know? So I'm on the Facebook site for Elliott Bay Books, and I see the live video feed. Is there any way to share that to my site right now, to my Facebook? Anybody know?
Well, Karen will get back to you. She's probably juggling everyone. Karen will be the one that knows that, but she's probably getting things set up. She'll check with us, I'm sure, in a little bit.
Oh, I just found it.
Okay.
Right.
I think.
It's a very meta moment to see us here and then look at us on Facebook as well.
I can't do that. There's too many of us, of me, I guess.
Oh my gosh, that is so meta. Whoa. Getting out of there.
Oh, it's so good to see all of these names coming in.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you all. It was another beautiful day down here in the Sonoran Desert.
It's true. I will second that, Simmons, because it was chilly and we have waited for our chili, haven't we? It's so wonderful.
Have. Yes, and there was snow up on the Catalinas.
Yes.
Ooh.
Really beautiful.
I have not been up there since the wildfires this spring.
It was drippy and cold here, but that's okay. It's November.
That's about the same here. We had beautiful weather for the last 4 or 5 days, and then now it's back more towards seasonal.
We're getting dark and gray here in Seattle. Chilly. Seasonal though.
Oh, and here's Janine DeBase giving us the report from New York. Beautiful 70s, lovely.
We had snow in Leavenworth this morning.
Wow.
Wow. What elevation are you at there, Derek?
You know, we're only at about 1,100 feet, but we butt right up against the mountains. So it feels like we're a lot higher.
Yeah.
I see Kim Stafford figured out the technology. Good for you, Kim.
And Susan Hansen reports the Texas weather is hot and dry. What a surprise.
Susan has been doing some wonderful snorkeling and posting the most incredible pictures from
Oh,
her travels. All in, I forget which river it is. San Marcos, the San Marcos River. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, can they hear us? Kim didn't hear me say that, did he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Of course he did.
Oh, man.
We
okay.
were told they're listening in. Derek, you missed the cue.
Oh, for goodness sake.
We should have really set him up more knowing that he didn't know.
Had we only known he didn't know.
Hanging on your every word, Kim says. Yeah, right. We got some great new Kim Stafford poems coming out in terrain.org pretty soon.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I don't necessarily want to steal Alison's thunder, but we published her new letter to America on terrain.org this morning. And I believe that's what she's reading today.
yes, it is.
Excellent. So if folks have dual monitors and want to read along with her, that's a possibility.
I think
Oh, and thank you, Karen. Karen has just posted the link for how to purchase a copy of the anthology.
yes, which has been selling, I will say, all this while.
Excellent. Did you put the new title on it? Dear America, Letters of Hope, Habitat for Season, Total Defiance and Democracy?
Total defiance, yes. Non-compliance. I think if you are all ready, we'll go ahead and start, since we don't have the usual issue of getting people parked or off buses or out of traffic or whatever to get in the door. As people will probably keep coming in a little bit through into this, but on behalf of everyone at Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, we welcome you and to this very special program, which for a book that came out this spring, but is a book that has been has been at least 4 years in a way in the making, although I think the concerns driving it come from before, but certainly the urgency that it's taken on have been come about these last years and continue even now. This anthology, Dear America, Letters of Hope, Habitat, Defiance, and Democracy, published this spring by the wonderful Trinity University Press, is compiled by the three editors who you'll be hearing from tonight, Simmons Buntin, Elizabeth Dodd, and Derek Sheffield, who are co-editors of this anthology and also all happen to be co-editors or play editorial roles with the wonderful online literary magazine of place, terrain.org. And terrain.org has a part in the story of this book where letters to this country were written by an incredible array of writers, poets, photographers, and tonight also we will benefit from one Attorney General, Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who's part of this. But tonight you will hear from the three editors, from Simmons and Elizabeth and Derek, as well as from Cherene Sherrard, and who's in Wisconsin, and Alison Hawthorn Deming, who is in Arizona. In fact, what we have is tonight, I guess probably should, since Cherene is part of this, is locate everyone in terms of, we have people here from Wisconsin, from Arizona, Kansas, and Washington, and some of these states just trying to conclude their vote count. That election is very much part of what fed this book, and it's a book that it's an extraordinary array of voices, of which you'll get to hear a few tonight. But I would definitely say, as Karen's posted, to get it if you don't have it. It's been selling well, but it's an extraordinary testament to what we've been going through, but what we are living through. So tonight I will shortly get out of the way, but Simmons Buntin, who is in Tucson, and he's the founding editor and editor-in-chief of Terrain, he will take over and kind of set everything else in motion. And he will also, after everyone has spoken and said things, field your questions, which you can put in the chat or the Q&A, and he will write to, and he'll pose them to everybody. And well, we're seeing people from all over the place coming in. This is great. So on that, and I'll come back at the very end, for my colleague Karen and everyone else at Elliott Bay, we thank you, and now ask you to please give your good attention and consideration to these voices from Dear America, and now, and particularly in the person of Simmons Buntin. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, Rick. Good evening, everyone. I'm joining you here from Tucson, Arizona, as Rick said, which is the ancestral and current lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Pascua Yaqui, as well as the ancestral lands of the Apache, Hopi, and Zuni. It is my honor and our duty to acknowledge their occupied territories. Thank you. And thanks again to Rick and to Karen and the good folks at Elliott Bay Book Company for hosting us tonight. It really is an honor to join you for tonight's After the Election reading and discussion with such amazing civil servants and writers and citizens. So on behalf of myself and wonderful co-editors, Elizabeth Dodd and Derek Sheffield, who you'll hear from in just a moment, welcome. Dear America, Letters of Hope, Habitat, Defiance, and Democracy, which is, there we go, now you can see it. It's a powerful, diverse, and necessary collection of 130 letters to America. They take the shape of poetry and prose and artwork, thanks guys. And even after the very, very relieving results of the presidential election, they are essential now, and I think you'll find far into the future. A quick note too, that all royalties from the sale of the book go to 3 nonprofits: the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the American Civil Liberties Union. So the book, just for a little background, grew out of the online Letter to America series on terrain.org, which is the award-winning place-based literary journal publishing online since 1998. With this morning's brand new post-election Letter to America from Alison Deming that you'll hear in just a bit, we've now published more than 200 letters since the 2016 presidential election. And there will be more, though if you're wondering, the Dear America book contains 50 previously unpublished letters that you'll find only in these pages. So let's get to it. I'll introduce Derek Sheffield, who is reading a poem and who will then introduce Attorney General Bob Ferguson. After Bob, Elizabeth Dodd will read a poem from the book and then introduce Cherene Sherrard. And after Cherene, I'll read a poem from the book and we'll close the reading with Alison Hawthorn Deming. Then we'll open it up for Q&A, so please use the Q&A function to post your questions. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Derek Sheffield, whose collection, Not for Luck, was selected by Mark Doty for the Wheelbarrow Books Poetry Prize and is forthcoming this January from Michigan State University Press. His other books include Through the Second Skin, which was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award, and of course, Dear America. Derek is the recipient of the James Hurst Poetry Prize, judged by Li Young Lee. He lives on the east side of the Cascades near Leavenworth, Washington, and beyond being the poetry editor of terrain.org, is an all-around good guy, and I learned late last spring, plays a pretty mean game of table tennis. Rick, take it away.
Thank you, Simmons. So yeah, it's great to be with you all here. It's great to see your beautiful names here, Doug and Heidi and Jennifer and Kurt and Kim, all you folks. Nancy, yes. Nancy, take note of my pin too, please. Okay. And I tell you, this is, it's so nice to be with you today because I was paying attention to some of the news. I made the mistake of paying attention to some of the news earlier. And so I just said to myself, hold on, just wait. You're going to be with Bob Ferguson tonight. All will be well. So we'll get to Bob pretty soon. And he is actually involved in the poem that I ended up contributing to this anthology. A couple of years ago in August, Bob Ferguson organized a protest hike on the Olympic coast of Washington. At that time, the Trump administration was proposing to drill for oil off our coast. And Bob and others, so many of us were completely alarmed by this. And Bob organized this hike. We gathered together with tribal members and representatives from various environmental organizations. I joined Bob's family with my daughter and some of these other folks, and we hiked a 20-mile stretch along the Olympic coast to protest these oil drills going in off our coast. So this is the poem, and it is called "What Will Keep Us." It is dedicated to Katie Ferguson and Kelsey Sheffield, and it has an epigraph from Peter Douglas. "The coast is never saved. It's always being saved." I have to tell you, reading that epigraph in this context here with you right now, it makes me think of democracy. Democracy is never done. It's never something we're done with. I think maybe a lot of us kind of forgot about that part of it, but it's something that we're always doing. And so I'm hoping that that we're going to remember that. So this is what will keep us. Every pack-heavied step over sand hoppers and weed-slicked rocks, through driftwood scatters and the chill of tide waters, over wooded headlands as wildfires blazed north, south, east. Every step says, stay. "I know mermaids aren't real," Kelsey says, "but Daddy, look," holding a whip of bull kelp whose light bulb face is a brown-green eye under ribbons of translucent hair. We trudge our miles, stepping over oscillating anemones in sunlit pools to pause at hole in the wall and let their tentacles tongue our dipped fingers. And what's this holographic sheen? Not the oil we would keep from this shore, and not plastic we see, just a rainbow's iridescence beaming from a plant. Over teeth of barnacled rocks poking from pools of sand crabs and sculpin, through foamy maroons, emeralds, violets, tangles of surf grass and lettuce cushioning our steps, we hike, flies parting briefly for our ankles as we take in the gleaming curve of the otter's tail as she rises and dives into clear shallows, a pliable needle threading us and them, water, land, and rippled sky, where the numberless legs of sandpipers twiddle their skittery flocks always just ahead. For even the reek slap of rot from a carcass too far gone for ravens or gulls, we hike for our own place among the eaters and the eaten, pricking at us as we see how wide the jawbone, how long and curved the fangs. For the piping stutter of a crow-mobbed eagle landing on a shaggy bough, for the lightest touches of day mist on our skin and our headlamps in the night lighting the tracks of slugs, silvering up every spruce trunk's loom. We hike for what will keep us if we keep it. On a bare stretch of sand ahead, a boulder splits into two bear cubs whose dark heads swivel our way before they turn as one toward the woods and lope out of sight to go on in the multitudinous dream we need to be beyond our reach. Out past the breaking lines of waves, we can just glimpse through binoculars where the rounded humps of humpbacks slope one way and gray whales the other. 60-some otters floating on their backs have knit themselves into a living net. Weft, warp, leg, paw, kelp blades fixed by holdfasts to the deepest rocks. What is it they catch in their drift of sleep amid mists and rolling webs of stars? Far enough where if we fail, the drills will rise. And what now as they ride day's swells in and out of sight in the rhythm of our own breathing? Our hike ends at the beginning of what the map calls wedding rocks, where people of the macaw long ago carved the round faces of sun and moon among fishers and fish, a whale, an orca. What feelings spilled through them as they knelt in these same unceasing sounds of waves, chip after chip falling away. We trace the grooves with our fingers, 5 centuries of wind laced with the wet snorts and hunger cries of passing animals. Kelsey kneels over some new swirl of shell and exclaims. Katie says not a word, drawing with her stick, something in the sand we can't yet see.
Right on, Derek. That is such an intricate and intimate poem. Thank you. All right, just wanted to chime in. I know you're introducing Bob now.
No, keep chiming, please. I love that chiming. It's like the bells ringing in Paris. You know, I tell you that the weight of that hike did not just come from the multicolored rocks that Kelsey kept slipping into my backpack as we were trudging along, but there was this weight that we were gathered there with this purpose, thanks to Bob, and so it had this extra gravitas. And I invite everybody to like go on your own protest hike wherever there's a place in danger, and or something, you know, and every day, and walk these miles, and you're thinking to yourself, my God, this is madness. You know, no one who has been here would propose that we invite the extraction industry right here. You know, I mean, it was insanity. So listen, I've known Bob for 33 years. He has not changed much. His character has been consistent. He's always been one of the smartest people in the room, no matter what room we're standing in. He happens to be the Attorney General of Washington State. He has twin children. Jack and Katie are 12, and his wife, Colleen, I can tell you was hard to keep up with on a hike. He is a great basketball player. I haven't yet played ping pong with him, but that may be coming thanks to you, Simmons. Mr. Bob Ferguson, please talk to us.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. And And thanks to everybody who's associated with this really wonderful volume. It's an honor to be a part of it, and thanks for including me. And I, just so you all know, I only agreed to participate under one condition, that is when there's the question and answer period, that nobody gets to ask Derek any questions about me during our college years. That's totally off limits, just so you know. Non-disclosure agreements have been signed by Derek. He can't talk about it, but it's true. It seemed like a lifetime ago. He and I were housemates together for a while. So don't play Derek in ping pong or tennis as well. Anything with a racket, you don't want to do it. But it's great to be a part of this. And look, I have a confession to make before I give some brief remarks. And that is, look, I'm not a writer. At least not in the sense that many people here are writers. We were chatting beforehand about the fact that, yes, we, my team, we write in a sense. Of course, we write legal briefs. It's not nearly as beautiful as what you just heard from Derek or what you'll hear from others here later on this evening. But one thing that I do tell my team and that I'm acutely aware of is, we are in our briefs filled with cases and case law and legalese and all sorts of Latin. We are at the end of the day telling stories in our briefs. That's what we do. We are appealing to a judge or judges or justices, as we were today in defending the Affordable Care Act for the US Supreme Court, by the way. We are telling stories, right, of impacts on the law, on people, or the environment. And I think I was asked to participate in this because my office, my team, and I have been active in litigation against the Trump administration. We filed the first lawsuit challenging the administration. That was the original travel ban a few weeks into Donald Trump's term. And that work's gone on. As I said, through today, we're in court with the state of California and other states defending the Affordable Care Act. So we filed more than 80 lawsuits, and that's a lot of litigation against an administration. Interestingly, more than half of those cases are about one general topic, and that topic is the environment. It's amazing how much this administration has set about attempting to systematically roll back every conceivable environmental protection you can think of. And these are protections put in place by bipartisan Congresses and presidents of both parties. Things like the Endangered Species Act, for example. Bedrock environmental laws that have helped our environment over many decades, they are rolling back at an alarming rate. So that has kept us busy. And so I was asked just to say a few minutes, not to read the letter that I wrote, although I'll refer to it in a moment, but just to speak about that. And those cases go to things that we all care a great deal about. You know, one of the lawsuits we most recently filed was to stop the proposed oil drilling plan for the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. We're leading a lawsuit challenging the administration's action on that proposal. Derek talked about the protest hike we had along the coast, which was to challenge a proposal to do oil drilling off the Pacific coast, fuel efficiency standards, you name it. It's been remarkable. So it's been nothing less than a true assault on our environment. I'm just so thankful to my team and others who have been involved in that litigation. The good news is that while our institutions have been challenged with this administration and are being challenged as we speak with the news that you sort of referred to, Derek, I think, of what's in the news even today, up to this point, I do believe that our institutions have proven to be stronger than any one individual, even a president. And the courts have been one such place. Of the 37, I think, cases that have been decided, those we brought, we've won 35 of those. Virtually every case we've filed that's been decided by a judge or justices, we've prevailed. And so I think that's both a testimony to how outrageous the conduct of this administration is in regards to our environment and our civil liberties, but also the strength of an independent judiciary that can really even hold a president accountable to the rule of law. Just the last thing I'll mention is, I'm not going to read my letter, of course, but I'm just going to reference it, and that is that after we filed that first lawsuit against the administration, it was on the first Muslim travel ban. We filed that lawsuit here in Seattle in federal court. And the outcome of that case was obviously very uncertain. It was a risky case to file, and we filed it and we prevailed. And I remember not long after we won, a couple days later, when I walked in the office, my executive assistant said, "Hey, Bob, you've got some letters." And they were letters from people who felt strongly about that travel ban, their opposition to it, and our success in that case. And, the first day there were 50 letters or so. And I said, well, that's nice people wrote. I said to her, for those who wrote from Washington State, let's handwrite a letter back to them. I thought, how many people can write me a letter about a law case, right? There can't be that many. Well, it turned out there ended up being thousands and thousands of letters that came into the office over the subsequent weeks on that one case. And so the job of responding to those with a handwritten note became a big job. But it was one that I enjoyed, and the letters were very moving. And so my letter to America was really, thank you, America, for the letters you sent to me. Because those letters, people spoke about what the travel ban meant to them in light of their own experience, their own lived experience, their family's past when it comes to immigration issues, you name it. They were very moving, or what it meant to be able to go to court and stop a president from doing something as outrageous and unconstitutional as a Muslim travel ban. So anyway, at that time, our kids were quite young, Jack and Katie, who Derek mentioned. They were probably 8 years old at the time. I hadn't said much to them about the travel ban. It seemed complicated subject, didn't really talk too much about it. I was gone a lot though, and they would often ask me, Daddy, why are you gone so much? And I just simply said, look, kids, the president did a bad thing and Daddy's trying to stop him. It was kind of my line to him. Well, one night I came home and I had a stack of letters that I was responding to. And at the dining room table, Katie, who was in that poem, was next to me doing her homework. And I had a stack of letters that day from children. Clearly the parents of some kids had made their children write to me about the travel ban case. So these were often children of families from countries impacted by the travel ban. And so there was a letter I had, and the kid, she turned out to be a girl from Iraq who was exactly Katie's age. She wrote as a kid would write. She drew a funny picture of me, and Katie noticed this letter, and she said to me, Daddy, what's that letter? And I said, well, it's a letter from a kid. And so Katie, of course, can't understand why a child her age is writing to her father about his work. So she said, why is she writing to you? And I read the letter to Katie. And in this letter, this little girl had written to me, among other things, she said, because you stood up, I can be here, which is really the most beautiful thing somebody could write to you, right? And so it was fascinating to me, speaking of telling stories, that Katie, in reading that letter from that girl, could grasp what was going on in that travel ban case, right? That 8-year-old girl could communicate directly to my child and help my child understand it. And I realized, frankly, my child can understand it at a level I had not appreciated. And Katie, God bless her, said, hey, well, can I add something to your letter? And so Katie wrote a note on there as well and drew a picture of a butterfly or something. And Katie asked if she could add a note to all the letters I received from children. So it became a tradition every night. We'd come down and sit down together and go through the letters from kids. And it turned out that Katie and that girl had a play date later on and got to know each other. And one thing I mention is people often ask, and I'll conclude with this, is saying, hey, Bob, what can I do? Me, wherever you live in this world, what can I do to make a difference? And I often refer to that letter from that little girl because, first of all, it made a difference to me, what that little girl wrote, 8 years old, right? It made a difference to my daughter, I can assure you of that. And that story in the letter of that little girl is the focus of my letter to America. And also when I speak to law schools all around the country, which I do frequently, I always show that letter from that girl every time. So that letter has literally been in front of, I don't even know how many future lawyers, right? Future leaders of our country, future individuals who'll be telling their own stories to judges and justices. And I'm confident that that little girl's letter has had a huge impact across our country. And it's why I was so proud to include it in this book as well. So again, I just so much appreciate being a part of this this really wonderful event and this wonderful book. And we'll continue doing our part. My team does a great job with these cases, telling the stories in the way that us lawyers do, not as eloquently as all of you, but hopefully trying to tell a story that's persuasive to judges and justices to make sure that that they're doing the right thing. And with that, I think I'm turning this over to you, Elizabeth. I hope I have that right. So I'm going to turn this over to you if I've got that right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. I would say that's one of the better stories I've heard in a long time. So yeah, written or not, that's a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks.
So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth now. Elizabeth Dodd is my wonderful friend and the most excited person I've hiked the Pumice Plain on Mount St. Helens with, and also the nonfiction editor at Cherene.org. Her most recent collection of very exceptional essays is Horizons Lens from the University of Nebraska Press. She lives in the Flint Hills region of Kansas, in one of the 5 counties voting to oust Trump in 2020, the farthest west in a little blue string across or along the Kansas River. Elizabeth, take us away.
Thank you, Simmons. And thank you, Bob, for that wonderful story. Thank you, Derek, for your beautiful poem. Thank you all for tuning in to be with us. When we were arranging for this particular reading, the last in our series with the wonderful folks at Elliott Bay Books, we didn't know how we would feel. We didn't know if we would know the results of the election yet. We didn't know how we would feel about the results if we did know them. And so in some ways, it was an act of faith for Elliott Bay Books to take us on. And as I think we're doing a lot, we were coming into the unknown. It's really good to be together this evening. I'm going to read a poem by one of our wonderful authors in the anthology, Miriam Marty Clark, and her poem is called What You'd Want to Remember. When I was preparing to read this also, I didn't know how I would feel as I read it. And I find that when I reflect how I could feel reading it, were the count to be in a different position where it is than it is right now. The poem, I think, would sound differently in my heart as well as in my head. I'm going to read it to you now, tonight, and I hope you enjoy it. What You'd Want to Remember by Miriam Marty Clark. Now, daylight spent, darkness falls before supper, votives flickering down the long table, and voices, someone leaning in to hear or back, to laugh or consider, someone reaching over to touch, tentative, kind, not out, but over, across the dark. It wasn't any one thing you'd want to remember later, a story, a gesture, a beautiful face, animated in the candlelight, the glasses refilled again and again, or how late you'd stayed, talking into that autumn night. You'd need an old world. You'd need an old word for what that was, our common wheel. You'd need that when you thought back. Miriam, thank you for that poem. I think I saw you in the list that you're here tonight, so thank you very, very much. I love that word, common wheel.
Oh gosh, that was beautiful, Elizabeth. Thank you. If I can interject, Simmons, Miriam, your poem has been one of the great gifts of the anthology, and it has kept me in touch with the better angels of myself. Thank you for that.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Cherene Sherrard. Originally from Los Angeles, Cherene is a poet, a scholar, and an essayist. She's the author of Dorothy West's Paradise, a biography of class and color, and 2 collections of poetry, Vixen and Grimoire from Autumn House Press. Her creative nonfiction and poetry have recently appeared in the Rumpus, Plume, the New York Times Magazine, Verse Daily, the Journal, Terrain.org, Blackbird, Waterstone Review, Prairie Schooner, and numerous other journals. She is the Sally Mead Hands Bascom Professor of English at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Cherene, please read to us.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for being here tonight, gathering together, and to Elizabeth and Derek and Simmons for including me in this wonderful anthology. The letter I'm going to be reading is entitled Driftless. And it gets its title from a region in the Midwest, but in Wisconsin, we often refer to it as the Driftless area, or the Driftless region. And you'll see that word Driftless written or on bumper stickers on cars. And it just refers to an area that was bypassed by the last continental glacier. And that's all I'll say. I'm not a geologist, but that's just where the title comes from. And it has 2 epigraphs. The first is from James Baldwin, his book, The Evidence of Things Not Seen. Blacks have never been and are not really considered to be citizens here in the American imagination, and in relationship to American institutions in reference to the slave codes, the first legal recognition of our presence remains the most compelling. And the second epigraph is from Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. But you said there was no defense. There ain't. Then what I do? Know it and go out the yard. Go on. My youngest is already grieving. Today, men came to our house to cut down a very old tree. We will not know how old until we can count the lines on the stump, and even then we can only estimate. The tree made our house a sanctuary, he said. His plea startles me. A sanctuary is a holy place, a refuge from one's enemies. It's true that the tree's long leaf-laden branches have shielded our 1922 colonial in Madison from harm. And yet fear has led us to remove it. 7 men, outfitted in orange vests and black helmets, swing among its branches as they must have done as boys. The work is laborious, precise, and slow. They navigate a cat's cradle of ropes and pulleys with chainsaws. Whenever a branch careens in the exact spot they have identified, they applaud. I explained to my son that in this age of the superstorm, having a tree so large loom over not 1 but 3 houses seems like baiting the gods. Oya, the whirlwind, and Shango, the lightning. But the casual eloquence with which my preteen drops sanctuary gives me pause. I'm thrilled that he finds our home a safe and secure place of comfort. But I'm alarmed. From what outside these walls does he want protection? The tree is a silver maple, Acer saccharinum, also known as the swamp maple, water maple, silverleaf maple, white maple, and soft maple. It's the sugar maple's stepbrother, a less loved half-sibling with sap too slow to tap, good only for shade. A genus that spews at least 4 different kinds of fruits in the slender window that is Wisconsin's spring. It throws off an abundance of seeds that clog and warp our gutters, funneling rain into our basement. First, heavy clumps of spongy red cotton, then helicopters, ovoid seed pods that spin and waggle until they rest on every lawn on our block. Its leaves are the last to turn. On Halloween, they backlight our house in saffron. Once, on a windless day, a branch so massive it could have been its own tree fell. It covered the entirety of our shared yard, miraculously missing everything of value, from the sun-gold tomatoes growing against our back fence, to our newly installed cedar plank deck, to the swing set upon which our neighbor's granddaughter was being pushed by her babysitter. Afterwards, as I laid my hand on the prone limb, wide as an oil drum, its earth-shattering thud became an illusory earworm, the answer to the perennial philosophical question. The granddaughter and our youngest son share a middle name, Sage, as in a wise person or mystic, or an herb that proliferates if you plant it in any amount of shade. Shade is the most apparent loss we will feel. Our air conditioning bills will skyrocket. Our deck become less hospitable between the hours of noon and 5. But we won't be afraid anymore, not of the tree, which will be gone. Left in its place, unimpeded blue, sharp as any sky above a desert, like the earth may be one day in our near future, treeless. We counted 81 rings before the lines on the stump vanished. The tree was older than my mother, but younger than my grandfather, who died last year at 101. This tree had barely begun to sprout when he was born to Louisiana sharecroppers in Shreveport. Its thin sapling was stretching up from the weeds when he married my grandmother, just sprouting branches and leaves when they joined the great migration of African Americans heading west to California. Whom did the silver maple oversee? How many has it safeguarded? A sanctuary is a shelter. The evicted squirrels will fight to nest in the black walnut that is now our block's undisputed heavyweight, living on borrowed time. The arborists with their beards and bronzed arms are fearless tree dancers. They sway and swing, limbs interlaced with limbs, unabashed as they fell the ancient giant. Elsewhere in our neighborhood, the culling continues. In the 1960s, ashes replaced the dying elms in the Midwest. Now the emerald ash borer threatens to wreak the same havoc as Dutch elm disease. We lobby the Forestry Service for gentler forms of remediation, but treatment is costly. Madison is technically a sanctuary city, but the designation has proved fungible. As rumors of ICE on the nearby campus where I teach flare, the university administration sends guidelines on how to dissemble and comply. Dissemble and comply is what I've taught my sons to do when confronted with outside authority. Wisconsin is proud of its abolitionist history, of providing temporary shelter for contraband. In Milton, there's a tunnel beneath an 1844 stagecoach inn that once served as a way station on the Underground Railroad. Visitors can walk 150 feet from the cavernous cellar to a small shed. That same path fugitives traveled by candlelight, which gave off a smoky gleam against limestone. In the anteroom, broken doll parts litter the floor. The key words are way station. Freed men and women were not meant to settle. The state anticipated they would continue on north to Canada, but some did not. One such family laid claim to land that was once a gathering ground for the Ho-Chunk and other First Nations. Notley Henderson purchased 40 acres in 1880 and ran a dairy farm on land that now comprises the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. Hiking its many trails with my family, one day we take an unfamiliar path that snakes under the Beltline. On the other side, we find a memorial plaque graced with the Henderson's family portrait. Wearing their Sunday best, Martha, Notley, and their children are the very image of restraint and respectability. Their son Alan worked the land until 1927. On March 5th of that year, he and his son Walter were murdered by Charles Nelson, the son of a neighboring farmer, a shell-shocked World War I veteran. Many thought Nelson's real diagnosis was racism. Alan's widow struggled to sustain the farm for 13 years before she was dispossessed. Their square plot, parcel 33 on an aerial map from 1890, now lies under the highway that bisects the arboreal preserve. What does sanctuary mean to a child in Mississippi coming home from her first day of 4th grade in August? She is eager to tell her mother how she won the spelling bee game with the word asylum. She uses the key tucked under the doormat. The apartment is silent, empty. Her baby brother is next door with the neighbor's teenage daughter. All three sit unattended at the kitchen table, wondering, until someone thinks to turn on the news of the latest raid. In the backyard of my family home in Los Angeles, lemon and apricot trees created a damp, buzzing glade of clover that I viewed upside down from the seat of a tire swing. Our lemons were the size of Florida grapefruits. Years later, when I first purchased a lemon from a Wegmans supermarket in upstate New York, I was shocked by the diminutive size and exorbitant cost of the wrinkled yellow fruit that fit in my palm. One of those California lemons from my parents' tree was enough for a pitcher of lemonade. Clusters grew so high and thick that passerby would jump our fences. To discourage trespassing, my mother left paper bags of lemons on the sidewalk. Sometimes we caught men selling our windfall fruit at an intersection adjacent to the freeway off-ramp, 1 for $1. In Forest Hills, a sprawling cemetery 2 blocks from our house, my son and I locate the Hendersons' final resting place. Their grave marker is just west of the section in which a sympathetic war widow buried 140 Confederate soldiers who had been imprisoned at Camp Randall. After the Charlottesville incident, Mayor Soglin removed the Confederate monument that named the soldiers unsung heroes. Which part of ourselves do we preserve, and what do we take down? For a moment, we feel that we spiral like the Silver Maples helicopters, driftless, ever searching for new ground. A few of the Hendersons' descendants still live in Madison. Others have scattered. We find the stately black and pink marble slab with its precisely chiseled names reassuring. At least they still have their tree, my son says, pointing directly above the plot. Thick with sun-splashed leaves, a red maple stands sentinel.
Thank you, Cherene, for that powerful and so important essay and letter to America. I'm so delighted that you're part of this collection and part now of the Terrain.org family. Thank you again. It's my pleasure now to read a poem from the collection as well. And we knew we were going to read poems, Derek and Elizabeth and I. Derek knew he would read his poem, and Elizabeth stole Miriam's poem from me right away. I'm teasing Elizabeth. I will say, though, that I've known of all the people here, and there are so many good people here, I've known Miriam the longest, as she was my undergraduate teacher at Auburn University many, many moons ago. But now it is my pleasure to read a teacher of a different location's poem from the book. I'm going to read In the Wake by Anne Haven McDonnell. And this is a really lovely poem that came to us right after the 2016 presidential election, as we were rolling out the letters following Alison Deming's first letter. Again, this is In the Wake. This morning, the moon is a ghost bone in a pale blue sky. Our bodies huddle for warmth in cold seeps of winter. They say our whole time on earth will darken and press into a thin, flaky layer of stone. Even plastic, even bombs, even music and cell phones, old churches and skyscrapers and jets, all our bodies, and with our bodies, our ideas about the world as ours, our ideas about whales and bees and redwoods and wolves, and the bodies of whales, bees, redwoods, and wolves. But today, in the wake, I watch each body pass on the street. I linger in each stranger's eyes, silent, listening beneath skin. On the rim of a canyon, coyotes let loose an unhinged chorus, lit on the tip of my tongue. I know the fires have started. I know the bodies I will protect. A queer spring in my step, a shimmer in my stride. My cry swells like a wave over lies, shivers down any spine, dissolves into language of lichen and stone. I quiver all the way to dawn, then bring it back as heat, urgent as the purr of nerves quickening, sure as the lynx who stalks silence on a ridgeline, her lush spotted coat, her paws stitching the unbroken snow. Thank you, Annie, for that amazing poem. Thanks also, before I forget, to Trinity University Press for working with us for this amazing manuscript. And also, before we turn this over to Alison Hawthorn Deming, I want to remind folks that we're going to entertain some questions after. So if you'd like to post something to the Q&A, we look forward to that. Alison Hawthorn Deming's most recent books include Zoologies on Animals and the Human Spirit and the poetry collection Stairway to Heaven. Recipient of an Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and Walt Whitman Award, she is a Regents Professor at the University of Arizona. She lives in Tucson and on Grand Manan Island, New Brunswick, Canada. Her new nonfiction book, A Woven World, will be out from Counterpoint Press in August 2021. For those of you not aware, it was Alison's first letter to America in 2016 that sparked our long Letters to America series and, of course, this book. And it's only fitting, I think, that she should publish and read tonight the first post-2020 election letter to America. Also, Alison is likewise a pretty darn good table tennis player.
Not as good as Derek, but I'll match him up anytime and give it a try. Thank you. I just want to say, you know, after we've suffered 4 years of the abuse of language, among other things, it's really beautiful to be among people who use language in such beautiful, meaningful, resonant ways. So I'm just so pleased to be among you tonight. And thanks to everybody for coming. So I'm going to read this new letter. Dear America, a week or so ago, I met via Zoom with a group of students in Texas to talk about this anthology and what was then the upcoming election. What's the difference between the candidates? One student asked in that world-weary tone so common these days of a person who has little faith in our institutions. I thought for a moment of listing policies and ideologies, lies versus truth, science versus propaganda. But I knew that would sound like more drubbing of polarizing memes. So I said that in the simplest sense, the election was a choice between kindness and cruelty. This administration has gone beyond cruel to being sadistic, insensitive to pain and suffering, actively pursuing policies that enhance pain and suffering in the form of disease, death, exclusion, injustice, poverty, and planetary peril. In my moments of lowest expectation, I thought, well, it would be good enough, considering the obstacles that will be thrown before a new administration, if we get a mask mandate and re-enter the Paris Climate Accord. Naturally, I hoped for much more. So thank you, America, for turning us toward a kinder direction. We've earned a moment of joy and gratitude, joy spilling out into the streets as it does when tyrants fall. Lafayette Square in DC filled with music and revelers within earshot of the White House. And I did have a line about Paris bells and London fireworks, but the Washington Post reports today that, sorry, Americans, it's not all about you. Those were just happening anyway. But of course, we felt anything that was a celebration to be ours, but it wasn't. So thank you, Washington Post, for helping with that edit. Nonetheless, the mayor of Paris, that city of love, sent congratulations saying, welcome back, America. Pots and pans banged in Brooklyn, and I swear on my morning desert walk, I felt the planet take a sigh of relief. Human beings have an unspeakable capacity for cruelty, but it is wrong and morally ugly to give cruelty free rein and invite it to exert sadistic power over people, equally true for the family and the state. We're troubled by how many of us voted to continue the Trump regime. It will take time to understand that choice in the electorate. Trump will characteristically fail to honor the democratic process in transition, but he will very soon be as irrelevant as a scrappy parking lot wedged between a crematorium and a sex shop. The citizens who voted for him will be with us, and we will have to engage in new conversations. Losing hurts, but the truth is that cruelty lost in this election, and we are now committed to becoming a kinder nation. A lot of us have been weeping, privately and publicly. A lot of us have been surprised by our weeping, tears of joy and gratitude, yes, tears releasing so much pain repressed over the past 4 years and the generational pain of our violent history. The suffering of immigrants and people of color becomes less abstract when we see another's tears fall unabashedly. TV anchors, those staid purveyors of public persona, weeping. Van Jones weeping to see the electorate's acknowledgement that character matters, being a good person matters. Don Lemon weeping at how many times he'd been called fag or nigger during those past 4 years when our citizenry has been given a license for hatred. But it was the POC on the street interviews that really got me. The lives of immigrants are no longer expendable, one said. And another, an immigrant from India, if I recall, said, as if our presence is validated. I found myself weeping and whispering, let me weep by your side. Human beings have a profound need for a sense of belonging. We find it in family, not without argument and vexation and suffering. We find it in our home places, and we find it in a nation. A nation is first the land, and second, an idea of belonging. During the regime of cruelty, many of us felt we no longer belonged here. We felt orphaned by a nation, veered away from its promise that we all belonged together, and that used violence to make literal orphans of those who sought refuge here. So however rough the road ahead may be, I want to express my gratitude to you, America, for coming out to vote, and especially all the first-time voters, youth voters, African-American, Latinx, Native American, and all the rainbow of our people voters who had the courage to step up during this pandemic, while among them so many have suffered. Gratitude also for those white people, my people, who voted for Biden and Harris, though it saddens me to say that at the present count, 57% of white people voted for Trump. I cannot claim to know why, but I will throw fear and propaganda down as my hypothesis. So, white people, we have work to do. White youth, please help us to get our people on the train heading toward a better future. An America the beautiful that honors our magnificent natural heritage and the moral beauty of the ideas that we aspire to. Democracy is never realized, but always strived for. And as for my kin in the 57%, please come talk to me. But please, again, no guns or camo. And let's try to decontaminate ourselves from the poison of distrust and obstructionism. Gratitude also because I am a partisan of the animal world. To the horses that carried some Navajo voters to the polls in the Navajo Nation and Latinx voters to the polls in Nevada. Let these horses stand in for all we love in the more than human world, and our pledge to protect and honor the full evolutionary potential of our fellow creatures and of our generous, wounded, and resilient mother, the planet Earth. So we're posting pictures of Lady Liberty again as she lifts her lamp over New York Harbor. It's a good time for us to remember that she came as a gift from France in celebration of America's emancipation of enslaved Africans. We relate to that party too, but we got there and the world was watching, as they are watching now, and celebrating that a democratic voting process has unseated an aspiring tyrant. It wasn't until Emma Lazarus's poem for Lady Liberty that the statue came to signify a welcome to immigrants, the hungry, tempest-tossed, who sought a refuge among us. Maybe all democracy means is that we will try to care for one another. And that means, as Rev Sharpton cautions, we stop being so purist and judgmental. America, like nature, is in a constant process of reinvention. This isn't a video game or reality TV. This is real life or death, our struggle to live together with our differences. I will always take the side of this hope for justice and a beautiful America that takes care of its own and others, a smart nation in which we embrace the truth that we are all woven together in our suffering and compassion, that we hold each other accountable for our mistakes and cruelty, and yes, for breaking our laws, thank you, Bob, and that we try in earnest to care where care is lacking. So let's raise our voices again as we try to reassemble into coherence the crazy quilt that is our nation. Unlike a log cabin or starburst quilt that has a predetermined pattern for the finished product, a crazy quilt is like nature. It takes the materials of what is given. For the quilt, that means scraps saved, inherited, foraged, and proceeds. The quilter is not quite certain how it's going to turn out, but trusts that inherent in our nature, there is an imperative to create order and beauty. With focus and labor, imagination and collaboration, the pieces come together, just as if we knew what we were doing all along.
Thank you so much, Alison. And thank you, Bob and Cherene, and of course, Derek and Elizabeth and everybody who joined us. We're gonna get to some Q&A. But first, I wanna sort of thank everybody here on the panel for being such an integral part of our crazy quilt. I mean, that is right on. Okay, so we have some questions. Feel free, folks, to unmute. I'm gonna run through these, and the first question is directed to Bob, and I'm hoping we can have a quick answer, not because I don't want to hear from Bob, but just because please God, I hope there's a quick good answer to this question. Okay, what is your read on the GOP's current maneuverings? I'm trying not to be alarmed by Secretary Pompeo's and AG Barr's words and by Trump's ongoing refusal to cede power to the president-elect. Are these just the to be expected actions of a sore loser, or are we witnessing a slow motion coup?
Well, I guess I'll give a short answer. There's obviously a very long one, but I guess, how about this? I'm alarmed. I would say I'm not, alarmed would be putting it mildly from my standpoint. You know, what we're seeing is not normal. I understand that after 4 years of this president, his behavior, his rhetoric can become normalized. It can feel that way after a while, but I don't think we should be under any misunderstanding of what's actually going on. So I guess what I would say to keep the answer very, very short is, look, I had multiple meetings with my legal team today talking about these issues. I had a meeting today, a lengthy meeting today with other Democratic attorneys general across the country about these issues. There are a lot of, I guess I would want you to know that there's a lot of smart people on my team and other teams across the country who this is what they're doing and are prepared to litigate if necessary across this country to make sure the will of all of you, the will of the American people, which is foundational, obviously, to our democracies, upheld. And so, no, we take it very, very seriously. And that's one thing I've learned with this administration is if Donald Trump says he's going to do something, often he will try to do something. And I just take him at his word now. I don't, that's just the way I operate. And I think that's the way many of us do now. So I think it's good to be alarmed and to speak out in the way that's appropriate for you, wherever you live, I think is appropriate as well.
Thank you. The next question by Oregon poet laureate Kim Stafford. The question I am carrying since the election: how can I be a good citizen in a divided country? Can you help me with this? Alison, I'd like to point to you to start.
Thanks,
If
Simmons.
that's okay. Well, with the letters to America, how
Yeah.
can we be good citizens in a divided country?
Well, we all feel divided in ourselves, in some cases we're divided in our families, among our coworkers, in the places we live, and that can be very painful. But number one, we have to start with interrogating ourselves. I mean, when I came up with this kindness versus cruelty thing, I had to ask myself to check the impulses toward cruelty. My cruelties are small compared to what's going on with this pathological and corrupt administration. But, I'm quick to anger, quick to judge, quick to say, I've got nothing to say to you people who voted for Trump, and I have to stop that. I mean, I have to find something to say. I have to try to find a way to have a conversation. I mean, the problem is that when people's realities are being shaped by propaganda, and they're fixed in that propagandistic belief, it's extraordinarily challenging to get inside. That's why I think stories and song and anything with emotion is helpful. It brings people together. But I think we're going to have to be learning a lot about how to hold people accountable for acts that are cruel and or illegal, but then how we find new levels of generosity and listening for those who are just pissed off and brokenhearted and scared. I mean, I welcome suggestions from everyone, because I'm really troubled by this. What do? I sit down and I write 3 pages, and I hope that helps some people not feel only anger and fear about what's going on, but helps us feel, yes, we still love this country, and we have to speak about the feeling of belonging that it is to be an American in a place where we have hope. So basically I write, and the rest of it is very hard for me, as it is for everyone else.
Thank you, Alison. Cherene, can I ask the same question of you?
It's something I've just been, thinking on for a while, and I was looking, happened to look in the questions and the one that's coming up. And in some ways, I feel like that question that's, it seems like it's directed towards me in the chat. I feel like my answer to that upcoming question, I'll let you read it later. Maybe I should just say what it is.
Yeah, say what it is.
Okay. It says, Cherene, do you think President-elect Biden has set the right tone in his remarks to the nation on winning the election? Same for VP-elect Harris. And I think the reason that struck me or stood out to me is another way to maybe answer the first question, is that we've never really had a truth and reconciliation hearing around the many things that have been done to build this nation, around slavery, among the genocide of the Native peoples here, amongst the continued persecution of Native land and the encroachment of the policies that are even try and wither away further, at reservation lands that are constantly overseeding the sovereignty of those places. So I think it's hard to come away from an election where I think some people feel like, as happy as they are that Biden and VP Harris has won, as much as a milestone it is for Kamala to be our vice president, that people feel, I think that there is some sense that there was, on one side there was Trump, and on the other side was the status quo, right? And the status quo is not acceptable, right? And so I think what we heard to some extent, I think, from the speeches that President-elect Biden and VP Kamala Harris, I feel like they were trying to communicate that they heard the voices of the people that voted, and that they recognized, they saw that they're the ones who were responsible for the victory, and that it was not going to return to the status quo. But If history is any teacher, we know that's often what happens. And so I do think, again, I think there is relief. I think there is cautious optimism, but there is also the sense that we have seen these kinds of cyclical turns happen again and again. So I guess I do think it was the tone of healing and a tone of acknowledgement of the voices that really made themselves heard. But I also think there is that bit of caution that we do not just return back to the same patterns that we've seen with the Democrats, frankly.
Thank you. Elizabeth and Derek, do you mind if I go to the next question and we'll get your input on this one? Susan Hansen asks or says, I love the word commonweal, which came from Miriam Marty Clark's poem. How do you see that embodied in the pieces each of you read? How do you see it unfolding in the days to come? Elizabeth, can I start with you on that one?
Sure. So commonweal, I looked up commonweal a little bit ago, just because it's such a great word. And the first time it shows up in the English language is in 888. So it's a very, very old English word. And of course it means commonwealth, right? It's commonwealth, but it precedes capitalism by so long that I think one of the things I love about that word is that it suggests that wealth or treasure, as some cultures say, they speak of, particularly in New Zealand, Native people speak of the treasure, which is essentially the commonweal. It is the commonwealth. And that suggests how interconnected we are. The United States has, I think, a pathological myth of rugged individualism and separation of people. The one time I got away from home since the pandemic broke out was to go up to northwestern Nebraska. And when you drive so far from one ranch house to the next, and you realize everything that people must do on their own to get through the day, the kind of self-sufficiency that is just part of one's daily existence, I said aloud, now I get it. I get why people have such a deep investment in the myth of individuality. But I do see it as a myth, and that we have a common wheel, we have a common connection, and that we have treasure, we have mutual wealth only as we are mutual and connected. So, okay, so that was just me pontificating on the word commonweal. And that's not Susan's question. Susan's question is, how do we see that embodied in the pieces everybody read? And so I should let other people talk about that in regards to their work.
Derek?
Well, yeah, I just want to say Kamala wheel. I'm coining that tonight. Kamala wheel. I want some Kamala wheel. In response to the question, I can just tell you that what I'm doing is to manage myself is to just keep thinking of the people, like there are people that I love and respect and admire who voted for Trump, and something happened there. And I just try to keep holding those people in mind, and because dovetailing on what Elizabeth said, the big problem has been how core culture has othered peoples and other beings on the planet for so long. And we can't let them fall into that same kind of thinking of other. And how do we do that while also insisting on the kinds of changes that need to happen. I do have hope in thinking about what Cherene said, that it is different this time. It sure feels different this time. In my lifetime, the stakes have never been greater for the welfare of our people, especially in regards to social justice and our mother. We've got about an 8-year window to act dramatically on the climate crisis.
Thank you,
Well,
Derek.
can I
Alison?
throw a couple words in here? So, you know, I think that we have these two big categories of trouble that we're trying to deal with: social justice trouble and the environmental trouble. And I think one of our tasks is to bring them together and see them as one. They are one. And they both, if you think about what is the big lesson we've learned in our understanding of the planet, it's an ecological lesson. It's a lesson that everything is connected and everything is interconnected, and that you cannot look at just one species or one little neighborhood. You have to look at the interrelationship of species. And now, of course, we have to have a consciousness of the entire planet and its well-being. That's hard. That's a big mental shift, and we are on a big learning curve. But the lesson, the ecological lesson, is that everything is connected. And this goes back to what Elizabeth was saying about connectivity and the terrible myth of rugged individualism. If we don't deal with, you know, we hear liberty. It's a matter of liberty not to use my mask. It's a matter of liberty not to have my ability to make money off of oil, even if it ruins the planet. But your act constrains the liberty of millions and millions of people on this planet if you make it uninhabitable. So your individual liberty is not the only question. It is our collective sense of liberty and well-being. And liberty has to be translated into that sort of ecological way of thinking. That does your act constrain your own liberty, and who else's liberty is your act constraining? And we can do it with climate change, because we can think of, well, primarily the impact is on disadvantaged communities of color. They're suffering the most, right, for climate change, and they're most likely to continue to do so unless things change. And all species will suffer. So whose liberty are we constraining? The people whose liberty we've been constraining all along for hundreds of years, for crying out loud. Can't we get it into our heads? So I think I think Elizabeth is, and everybody really is touching on the challenge for us is to think, you know, while we love our self-actualization and individualized well-being, we must learn that the ecological lesson has to apply to our social well-being and our sense of justice and what liberty means to us. That word has been stolen and misused. It doesn't fit a democracy if you're only saying, liberty means for me, I don't wear a mask and it doesn't matter. You are constraining the liberty of everyone around you if you do not wear a mask. So connectivity, I think, is you know, the ecological metaphor is we are interconnected and we have to start behaving that way. And that's a hard lesson. It's a learning curve, and we're on it. And can we do it? Let's hope.
Thank you, Alison. Bob or
Can I
Cherene?
add one other, sorry, can I add one other tiny thing? And it's, the idea certainly isn't original with me, but what I do think it's different this time. And I believed Anita Hill, and I stayed home from work for 2 days to watch her speak before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which was presided over by Biden. And it took me a long time to forgive him for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he has shown us that he is educable. And that is, I think, a very valuable thing. And I think one thing that has come out of the last 4 years is that a lot of people who look like me were not used to feeling that they were the target of harm from their own government. And so many of us have now, and we didn't before. And we get it. Now we get it. And we have to not fall back into complacency.
Okay, thank you. Bob or Cherene, any closing? I'd like to close on this question if we can. Bob?
Sure, I'll be brief, and I'm not sure how much this adds to what's been said already. That's pretty thoughtful, but just maybe just one thought I'll put out there, almost maybe a challenge of sorts, is I know there's a lot of discussion of how could tens of millions of Americans have voted for Donald Trump after the last 4 years? Like maybe we can wrap our mind around the first time, right, for a variety of reasons, but how could it be this time? And I sense from some of the comments of a desire to, how do we reach out to folks on the other side? Because that other side feels like a gulf, feels like a chasm, a canyon, right? I guess what I would say is that I do think it is incumbent upon all of us to do that and to find ways in our personal life or professional life to do exactly that. I'll just give you an example. In my life, I set a goal as Attorney General of my state here in Washington. I represent the entire state, obviously. Well, how do I make sure I'm not just here in my North Seattle bubble where it's 85% Trump? How am I making sure I'm hearing from all my constituents? I set a goal. It was kind of a random goal, but in order to force myself all around the state, I said, well, I'm going to go speak to every Rotary Club in the state of Washington. Now, that's a certain segment of our society, Rotarians, let's be honest, but it did get me out to every community, right? Small towns in our state, red counties, blue counties, you name it. I've been to all but like 3. There's a couple hundred of them. COVID slowed me down for the last few. And I just will say that in doing that, obviously in certain counties, certain Rotary clubs, there's a lot of Trump supporters who are not very excited about all the work that I'm doing, filing lawsuits against Donald Trump, okay? But I think because we were sort of forced together to get into a room over a bad lunch to talk, I could present why I was doing those things, and they could ask me whatever they wanted, okay? It was civil, right? But they could ask whatever they wanted. Now, I'm not suggesting I was changing anyone's mind, by the way I talked about those cases, or that they're necessarily changing my minds, but I did walk away from those experiences convinced. I think we all came out of it a little bit better off, right? Having exchanged those conversations. Now, I don't know in the literary world what the best way to do that is, right? I know my world, right? But as individuals, as citizens in our personal life, in our professional life, I do think we need to find some way, whatever that equivalent is for all of you, to reach out where you really are having a true conversation with folks, not necessarily with the goal of changing their minds, but I do think those conversations, I really do think they can be helpful. And I'm certainly committed to doing more of that here in the next few years. Thanks again, everybody, for letting me join this.
Thank you.
Simmons, I'd like to share something, Bob made me think of when he mentioned he wasn't sure how writers were thinking of this topic. And I came across this passage by Toni Morrison last week, thanks to Ellen Bass. And Toni Morrison had some feelings, some words that to me expressed exactly what we've been up to with the Letter to America series and with the book Dear America. Toni Morrison, in an award acceptance speech delivered at Vanderbilt in the spring of 2013, said, "I am a writer, and my faith in the world of art is intense, but not irrational or naive. Art invites us to take the journey beyond price, beyond costs, into bearing witness to the world as it is and as it should be. Art invites us to know beauty and to solicit it from even the most tragic of circumstances. Art reminds us that we belong here, and if we serve, we last. My faith in art rivals my admiration for any other discourse. Its conversation with the public and among its various genres is critical to the understanding of what it means to care deeply and to be human completely. I believe."
Amen. Thank you. Cherene?
To say Morrison's always a good note to end on. The only other thing that I would ask is that, or that I would add is that, it's hard to change people's minds when you are lecturing to them. But sometimes if you ask them why they think the way they do and you get them talking, as they listen to themselves, will sometimes reflect and come to a different decision. And so I think some of what Bob and Derek's quote from Morrison really suggests that, we just have to have these conversations and hope that, the truth will prevail, especially when people hear for themselves what they're saying, that we'll be able to undo some of what just, the brainwashing and the gaslighting we've been experiencing for these last several years.
Thank you. I think that is a great note to end on. Again, I want to thank Cherene and Alison and Bob, as well as Elizabeth and Derek and Elliott Bay Book Company for hosting us. Rick, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Simmons. And all I'll say for our part is this has been extraordinary. I mean, what we didn't say at all in acknowledging this whole night was that we could have been in a room together in that kind of communal sense, because this leads to all the conversations it would lead to afterwards amongst each other, especially with the group here, which would have had a little trouble getting all to Seattle, I think, tonight, given some of the places people are here from. But I think this is a good night, a good time for this conversation and this book, for people to pick this book up if they haven't, and if they have, to go back into it and keep reading it, because I think there are things, and I think Alison's talked about the damage that's been attempted with language itself these last years. So to kind of immerse ourselves in that better language is good and important for all of us. We special acknowledgement and thanks again to Bob and the work he's done, and hopefully won't have to do in these weeks ahead. But we're there for you if whatever has to be done. And again, for all of us, we thank you and say good night, and stay safe, and we'll hopefully get to see each other in a real life sometime again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. You're wonderful.
This makes a great holiday gift from Elliott Bay Books.